Okay, now you should hear me. My bad there. So anyway, as I was saying, but you didn't hear me, this is Justin, aka Demonic Sweaters, and this is episode number 50 of the Demonic Sweaters podcast. And yeah, I'm finally back with another podcast episode and live stream here on YouTube if you're around. Yeah, it's been a while. I was pretty busy there for a while. You may have heard me talk about a few episodes ago how I was doing a summer camp for kids, music summer camp, and that was taking up quite a bit of my energy. So, and still keeping up the usual YouTube videos while I was doing that, the podcast kind of got put on the back burner just because I just really didn't have the time or the energy to do it, really, because after I would get done 6-7 hours with a bunch of kids, I'd come home and feel like basically I ran like a triple marathon. Because, yeah, kids really wear you out, which I'm sure if you have them, you are well aware of that. The great thing about being a teacher and not having kids is you can enjoy kids while you're there, and then you can just leave them and come home to your peaceful home. So, yeah, that's a very nice benefit that I quickly realized, after teaching, since I don't have kids and teaching and going there and being like, wow, it's really good that I can go home and take a break now. Maybe that's awful of me saying that, but I don't think so. I'm sure parents know what I mean when I'm saying stuff like that. So anyway, the song that you just heard there was off of one of my older albums called Sol Lepidoptera. I can't even say my own album title. It was a pretty pretentious title. It's Latin for sun butterfly or something, or sun moth, really. But that album was kind of like a lot of stuff that I had recorded over a period of time and just never really did anything with it, so I just put it all together on that album and released it. And that one is one of my favorite tracks off of that. It is called Radiant Dream, and I think it's a pretty cool track. I did that I know I did it in Linux, but I can't remember which program. It could have been Rose Garden, but I'm thinking maybe it might even been Muse Sequencer, which is a really weird, obscure sequencer for Linux that I tried to do a tutorial on in the past, but I never really got fully through doing Muse Sequencer just because I find it to be too unstable and too wonky to work with still. Even though it's got some cool stuff in there, it's kind of like a more complicated and complex version of Rose Garden in a way, is what it reminds me of. And I like, how it's kind of geared towards like old school MIDI, like working with old school MIDI, but it just seems to be a little bit, it's just a little bit unstable still. But hopefully you guys can hear me okay, and there's probably some background noise, but that is my air conditioner that's on behind me because it started to get kind of hot again today, so I had to turn it on. It was pretty cool or cooling down there for a while, and it wasn't that hot, and I could have all the windows open, which was nice. But at the same time, I'm kind of sad that summer is ending because I'm really a summer person. It's really like just the season that I like the most. Maybe because I lived in Florida for so long that I'm not sure if this. Sorry, I'm getting distracted here. It doesn't look like the control panel in YouTube is working. I'm gonna have to refresh it because it doesn't look like anything's working there, and I'm not seeing any updates or anything, so I don't know if you guys are chatting with me or what's going on, so just bear with me here 1 second. And still weird, but okay, I think that's better. Oh wait, here it goes. There it goes. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. YouTube keeps changing like their stuff, and they really kind of tick off a lot of the YouTube community, which is nothing new. I mean, they've been doing that forever, but recently they forced us all to go to their new YouTube Studio beta. Like if you're a YouTuber, we have this thing called YouTube Studio, and it's basically like where you go to manage all your uploads and do all of your stuff like that. And for a long time they were working on this one YouTube Studio beta, and they still had Classic, and pretty much everybody was just you know, switching back to classic, including me. And then a few weeks ago, they forced all of us to basically go into studio beta, where we can still switch back to classic, but there's no way to permanently switch it. So if you're on, you know, when you go into your YouTube settings or your YouTube studio, you have to manually exit out and go to classic every single time if you want to use classic. But I've actually just been using the new one because I'm like, well, they're going to force me to do this anyway, so I might as well get used to it. But the thing is it's just, I don't know what, like, they always like change things that really just don't need to be changed. Like when stuff works, I mean, there's that old I'm sure other people say it everywhere, but I think about it like a West Virginia kind of redneck thing. They say, like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, because I'm from West Virginia. But, I mean, that philosophy makes sense, you know. A lot of the stuff, especially on the, you know, behind-the-scenes end of YouTube, worked really well. And they just keep messing with it. And, like, they changed the streaming, you know, the live stream stuff too, and it's kind of weird now. Like when I tried to go in to do this live stream, like I'm using OBS software as my streamer, and that way I can, you know, I can do like music transitions and, you know, have screensavers and all that stuff on there, or videos if I want to. But their default view when you go into to stream, it tries to open up your webcam automatically, and then that kept freezing up because I already have my webcam opened in OBS, and then every time I would try, like, it would force me to click allow on the webcam, you know, because I'm using Firefox, and every time I would do that, it would give me an error. So I had to figure out a way to, like, basically not click the webcam thing and then ignore it, just sort of move it out of the way, and then go into stream, like click on stream rather than let YouTube automatically load what it's trying to load. Anyway, it took me a little while to get in here to actually stream this, and that's why I was asking in the beginning if it was actually working, because I'm not totally sure. And again, I'm not 100% sure because the viewer activity is showing me nothing. It looks like analytics shows me a little bit. Stream health, let me look at that. Good. Well, that's good. Stream settings. Yeah, okay. So yeah, anyway, if anybody's out there, feel free to say hi in the chat. If you want to ask any questions along the ride, feel free to do that. And I will answer them the best I can. So a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. Let's look at my list here. Linux news. You know, I've been doing some uploads of, you know, YouTube reviews and, you know, product reviews and stuff like that. But I always do try to incorporate Linux in a lot of those. And I did that on one of my most recent ones, or my very most recent one, actually, this one about a Neewer mixer, which is a pretty cool little mixer. And if you haven't watched the video, go ahead and do that if you want. And not now, you should stay here now. But if you want to watch it later, feel free. But it's pretty cool. But the reason why I wanted to talk about it, because I didn't even test it in other stuff. Like I didn't even test it in Windows or Mac or anything like that. I only used it in Linux. And I was having weird issues that I kind of talk about in the video a little bit with Jack and Reaper while using that mixer. But I really just think it was my USB port that I was using, because I was using this Dell Inspiron 3000 that's pretty slow. And I don't know. I'm just not totally sure still, even though I tested it again in the video on my other laptop and everything with Jack worked just fine. That night, when I was actually doing the live video with Ronan, it's hard to say what exactly was happening, but all I do know is when I tested it in Audacity without Jack running, it did work, but at that point I did switch the USB port. So what was my whole point in bringing that up? No, geez. But I did have a point, but I can't really remember it now, so I'll just move past that, and maybe it'll come back to me. But other Linux news, I was just reading the company Pine64 is releasing a $25 Linux-based smartwatch, which is pretty interesting, because Victor, my boyfriend, he uses an Apple Watch, but I don't have an iPhone or an Apple anything, really. I'm going to have an old iBook, but I don't have anything new by Apple. And there's the link I just put in the chat to the $25 smartwatch, a Linux-based smartwatch. So, you know, I think it'd be cool to have something like this. I don't know how well it'll work, you know, and $25 seems awfully cheap. I mean, I wouldn't mind paying a little bit more than that, actually, like if it worked really well. Like there's a line, you know, like I think people like, you know, it's nice that things are affordable, and I want things to be affordable, but there's also too cheap. Like if things are too cheap, especially when it comes to technology, it's not that means it'll be bad, but I think the public doesn't value it as much, which is a shame, because some things, I mean, like that mixer that I reviewed, that thing's only $85, and like 15 years ago, there's no way I could have gotten a mixer this good. I'm actually using it right now, but there's no way I could have gotten a mixer this good for $85. Just absolutely no way. But at the same time, that makes people kind of like, I don't know, people are weird. Like they think that if something costs a lot, then it must be better, and they still think that way a lot of times. And sometimes that's true, but it's not always true. So, but that's why I'm saying $25 smartwatch, that might actually hurt them more than help them. Like, cause that's really cheap, like really cheap. But I don't know, it looks pretty cool in the photos. I don't know if that's like a real thing or if it's just a rendering, or something, but it's still pretty neat. But this company, Pine 64, they also make things like the Pine Book, which is like an $85 or a $99 Linux laptop. And then they make the Pine Book Pro, which is a $200 Linux laptop. So all their stuff is really inexpensive. Not super powerful, but they come pre-installed with Linux and all of that stuff on them already. So that's pretty cool. I'm glad somebody's doing that. I haven't actually tried one myself, any of the Pine 64 products, so I can't really comment on their quality or anything. But it's pretty cool stuff. So let's see what else is going on. Oh, I remember what I wanted to talk about that mixer. So if you did watch that video, when I mentioned the glitches in the audio for the first song that Ronan and Rel played together, there's a couple of spots that if you pay really close attention, there's one towards the beginning of the song and one towards the end of the song where like there was just a really weird jack glitch that made the it basically made it like skip. Like when I was playing back the song, there's like a skip in time. And so the fact that happened, luckily it didn't happen on any of the vocal parts, because that would have been like really weird sounding. I mean, it's already pretty weird sounding, but what I was able to do to make it sync up with the video, because the time was obviously different if it skipped. What I had to do is I took the mix down recording and I put it into Audacity, and then I took the camera audio and put that into Audacity too, and used that as my reference, and then snipped out, you know, a little bit where snipped out a little bit of time where the actual skip was, and then I cut a little bit of audio out of the camera audio and put it in there in its place to kind of like increase the length a little bit to make it sync up to the video. It doesn't sound perfect at all. Like you can totally tell where I did it. It sounds weird, but it's just two like little, like basically less than 1 second little sections in the song. So it wasn't too bad. And just for the purpose of the video, I think it was fine. Yeah, so sorry, I'm getting messages right now as I'm talking. That always happens. So yeah, I thought that was weird. I mean, it was just a weird thing that happened, but I was able to get it done, and overall, I do think it's a pretty good mixer, and I'm still using it. So what else do I have going on? Oh, pretty cool thing for me, actually, is I just picked up a fretless bass, which I'm horrible at playing still, but I've always wanted one, or not always, but probably for the past few years, because I really like bands, you know, like some of my favorite electronic music was like the electronic music that was made in the early 80s, like late 70s, early 80s, and especially like Japanese stuff like Yellow Magic Orchestra, Miharu Koshi, and things like that. And almost all of those bands, and like even bands like Japan, and who's the other one? Talk Talk, like the early Talk Talk stuff. Like everybody played fretless bass back then in like electronic music for some reason. It was just the thing that everybody did. And I love the sound of it. Like, I just think it sounds really cool, and it fits so well with synthesizers. So I've wanted one for a really long time, but they've always been pretty expensive. And so that always kind of kept me away from getting one. But since I did the review of that guitar that's back there behind me, that acoustic Rogue that you could get for $90, I saw that they also, that same company, made or makes a fretless bass for only, it's like $120. And so I found one in like a scratch and dent for $110. And it was like, it's really, really cheap, but it's actually, it doesn't play so bad. And I'm going to do a full video about it too. And it sounds great. I mean, it has the exact sound that I was looking for and that I was talking about. My only criticism of it is the look. Like, I just think it's pretty cheesy looking. But that's kind of like the case with a lot of fretless basses. I don't know why, but for some reason they always give them these like weird, like scrawny little designs, like for the bodies. Like, I don't quite get why they always do that on fretless, but anyway, I think it'll be cool, and I'll definitely have fun adding that into some of my music coming here pretty soon. So yeah, it doesn't look like there's a lot of people around for the live stream today, which is unfortunate, but if anybody pops up, sometimes it takes them a while to get on here. And it is kind of a weird time of day. It's like almost 3 p.m. So why don't I go ahead, I'm going to play another song now, and give you guys a chance to come around if you're going to be out, or if you are going to be coming on. And I'm not even making sense right now. Let me just play the song and I'll shut up. Where's my OBS? Okay. Here we go. What am I going to play? This one is going to be, I'm going to play something off of my album Minnesota, and this song is called Osprey. So here we go. Free by Minnesota, which is just another name for me, one of my other projects. That album was one that I recorded back in, well, I started recording it in 2015 and played all the instruments on it. And that one, you'll probably notice if you've listened to any of my other stuff, sounds quite different than all of my other albums. I don't know. I was just in that space at that time. I just wanted to do acoustic guitar, and I used that as the main, kind of the main focal point of the album, and then kind of wrote all the songs in acoustic, and then came up with all the other parts and just built them around that. And, you know, it's still all instrumental, or not still. I mean, some of my stuff's not instrumental, but that one is all instrumental. And I ended up getting it pressed on vinyl, 180 gram vinyl, with the help of a lot of great people doing a Kickstarter campaign. And so if you want to pick one of those up, I still have it on sale. You can just go, well, actually, a good thing to do right now is if you go to demonicsweaters.com, there's a coupon on there where you can get 10% off. And so that brings it only to $8. So it's pretty cheap for a record. So if you want to check that out, you can. Now, one of the things that I wanted to do on this podcast for a while, well, I do it sometimes, but I always forget to do stuff that I think of. But that is to mention an album from another artist that I like or I've been listening to. Sometimes they're smaller, sometimes it's well-known artists. It just doesn't matter. Just stuff that I'm listening to. And this one, the one that I wanted to talk about is the Paul McCartney album called Paul McCartney 2. Now, Paul McCartney 2, if you're not familiar, is a solo Paul McCartney record, and it is a very unique album. It's very strange because, well, for a lot of reasons, really. When this album came out, it was essentially panned by the critics. Like, most of them hated it. It's very uneven, you know, and like that was one of their complaints. And that's, you know, that is kind of true. Like well, to me, it's eclectic. What they considered uneven, I consider eclectic because it has such a range of sounds on it. Like everything from stuff that you would think of Paul McCartney doing, just sort of, you know, like melodic, poppy type rock songs that are very Paul McCartney and really good, to other ones that are just like experimental electronic like type songs. Like there's some really, really weird stuff on there. There's one called Temporary Secretary. There's one called Frozen Jap, and like just all these songs that are just, I don't know, they're just very hard to place. And especially at the time that it was released, he was definitely experimenting a lot. And that is just a great album. If you've never listened to Paul McCartney 2, just check it out. And I don't even think it's really the second, it's definitely not really the second solo album he did. But in a sense, like, it's kind of, the reason why he called it that is because the first solo album that he released, he recorded all at home with, at the time, very rudimentary, you know, home recording stuff that he had. It was like basically plugging directly into a reel-to-reel audio recorder, you know, tape recorder back then. And then this one was done in a very similar way. So it's him playing all the instruments and was recorded at home. And I think that was kind of why he called it Paul McCartney 2, because it's kind of like the second in that type of album, as opposed to being like his second solo album. So definitely check it out. It's really, really good. My favorite stuff by, I don't know, I think Paul, this may come as a surprise. Well, I don't know if it'll come as a surprise, but Paul's probably my favorite Beatle. As far as what I think the music that he produced on his own after the Beatles, I really, really love almost everything Paul McCartney has done, including Wings. Like, I think all the stuff's just great. Like, he's just such a talented guy. It's really, really good. And I also really, really like George Harrison. Now, this is something that actually I didn't even realize until pretty recently. I always thought George was pretty cool, but he definitely had less music on the albums than the rest of the, you know, or John and Paul. But his songs were always good, but I never really dug into his solo work that much, aside from the 80s stuff. Like, there was like the stuff that he did with the Traveling Wilburys that my dad really, really loved when that came out. And that stuff is really good. Like, it holds up really well. And if you're not familiar with the Traveling Wilburys, it was like basically like the most insane supergroup to ever exist. It had George Harrison, Tom Petty, Roy Orbison, Bob Dylan, and Jeff Lynne. And then I forget who the drummer was. He never gets mentioned, but he was actually a pretty respectable, admirable drummer too at the time. But I can't remember who it was. Yeah, forgive me. But yeah, so. But what I was saying is George, I've been going back and listening to a lot of the George stuff, and though I don't find it as consistent as Paul's, there are some songs that are really, really good. Like George, I think, was definitely one of the most underrated. Hey, what's up, Yusef? I think George was one of the most underrated Beatles for sure. And what I did is I just went on Apple Music and put on his the Essentials playlist, which is a pretty nice thing in Apple Music if you're just want to get a nice introduction to an artist. But I always try to go back and listen to full albums after that. So of course I've got to have the daily sirens going by in the back there. It wouldn't be New York or Brooklyn if you didn't have constant sirens or jackhammers outside your window at all hours of the day. But it's pretty funny. Like me and my sister joke about that too. Like New York City is literally the only place, well, I'm pretty sure, maybe there's others, maybe like Hong Kong or something would be like this too, but like it's probably one of the only places in the US where like at 3 a.m. you'll hear jackhammering. And the reason is because there's so many people and so much stuff going on all the time. Some of the construction projects that they have to do, the only time that they can do them literally is like 3 a.m. So they'll just be doing like all this crazy work out there in the middle of the night sometimes. I remember at my old apartment, they redid the whole subway station that was like right outside my front door. And they were working on that at all hours of the night. They had this like big, huge like generator thing out there. I don't even know what it was, like what it did. It was just this gigantic, massive machine that like made this like whoa, and they would just turn it on in the middle of the night and it'd just be like making that sound, and like I don't even know like what it did, like no idea. But so that's the kind of thing. Yeah, if you live in New York City, you just deal with this stuff all the time. And I think that's part of the thing that just stresses people out so much here, is just this constant just this constant noise and constant craziness going on. And yeah, it was pretty crazy. But well, actually this morning I was going on the subway and a lady came up to me and she was asking me for directions and trying to figure out where she was going. And she was going the wrong direction. She was trying to get to LaGuardia, but where she was, the subway that she was on, she would have ended up in like Coney Island if she'd stayed on there. So it's a good thing she ran into me and asked. But so I pointed her in the right direction, and then I started talking to her and was like, where are you from? And she told me she was from Boston. And Boston's not like a little city, but it's funny that like even when people come here from Boston, they're still like, it's just kind of crazy to them. Like it's dirty and it's big, and the subway, like the signs don't make any sense. Like you'll have a sign, sometimes there'll be a sign that, like in certain subway stations, one direction will say Uptown or Manhattan, and then the other direction will say Church Avenue. And like unless you like are familiar with the the city and know where Church Avenue is, that really tells you nothing. Like it should be Uptown, Downtown, or Manhattan, Brooklyn, but they'll put Manhattan, Church Avenue. Like I don't know who decided to name these signs, but some of them are just like so weird, where like it's so easy to get lost because they don't make any sense. And then like, especially if you're going out to like over towards the Rockaways and stuff like that, there's certain trains that have the same name that run 2 different lines, and that gets really confusing. Like I think is it the E train? I don't know, I can't remember. I'm not out there that often, but yeah, it's just a crazy place. I don't know. I've been here I came here in 2012, and so I've been here for almost 7 years, which is crazy to me. I can't believe I've been here that long. I don't think I've ever lived anywhere this long. And it's weird because most people, when they come to New York City, especially if they move here, a lot of people don't last. Like I knew a lot of friends who moved here, when I was younger and stuff, or and some that came over like even around the same time I did. And some people, they don't even last like a couple years, or they won't even last a year because it's expensive. It's hard to live here. But I don't know. It's just, I've been really lucky, I guess. I mean, if you consider it lucky to be here, but I do. It's like I kind of go back and forth. Like there's things about New York that I definitely hate, like the jackhammers at 3 a.m. and the rats and all that kind of crap. But that being said, there's some things about New York City that you just cannot get anywhere else, and that I absolutely love. Like I can get any type of food from anywhere in the world that I could ever possibly imagine, just right out there. I don't even have to leave. I could do it right on the computer. I can do Grubhub or Seamless or something like that and get it delivered right to my door pretty much anytime I want. That's New York City. If I want to go get a haircut and a nice back massage in Chinatown, like I can do that too, like for like, I don't know, like $18. Like a girl will like cut your hair and give you they'll like massage your head and like your back and your shoulders and all this stuff, and like give you a good haircut. Sometimes it's good to go with somebody who speaks Chinese. If there's nobody in there who speaks English, you might come out with a really bad haircut, which has happened to me before. But yeah, so there's things in New York City that you really just can't do anywhere else, and so I do really, really like that about it. There's really cool people here, but it's just there's ups and downs. It was the same as when I lived in Florida. There are ups and downs there too. I mean, Florida, I thought the weather was amazing, and it's beautiful there where I was, especially on the Gulf Coast around Tampa and St. Pete. It's really nice, but you're driving all over the place. You have to drive 40 minutes to do anything. Every job that I ever had was like I was driving 40 minutes to an hour. Traffic was horrible. The cost of living was cheaper, but you were spending so much on gas. Well, at that time especially, that was when Bush was still in office. Gas was really expensive towards the end of his term in the White House. It just got really, really crazily expensive. So yeah, it was difficult. Like I'd be like working and barely scraping by, and then suddenly I'd have like something happen to my car and have to spend like $1,000 to get my car fixed, and like that would be really difficult. But here, as soon as I got to New York City, I just sold my car, and you don't really need a car here, though there's definitely times where I wish I had one. But I use Car2Go, which is like this car sharing service, so I can get one, for pretty cheap and drive around the neighborhood if I need to. But there's the whole like thing. It's kind of like you're trapped here too at the same time, because like I don't have like my own car, so I can't just like drive away if I want to. So to do that takes considerable planning. You have to rent really far ahead, and like, or take a bus or a train or something, but everything sells out and there's so many people, so you have to plan everything really far in advance. But yeah, that's just more of that stuff. When you live here, you just deal with it. And of course, there's the insanely high rent prices, and cost of living is crazy. All of that stuff, That's how it goes, though. So let's get on to some other stuff here. I read this story. Not really getting any questions from you guys today. Don't be shy. You can ask me anything you want. But I saw this story that I thought was cool. Because I check out the UFO news pretty often, because I'm pretty into that stuff. And this one I saw, being from West Virginia, like I mentioned before, West Virginia is the home of the Mothman, if you didn't know that, the Mothman sightings of the 1960s. But I saw this site on the MUFON website, or this story rather, on the MUFON website, about a guy in Nevada saw a giant moth. And this was, actually it was about a year ago, it looks like, but that's fairly recent. I mean, that's definitely more recent than the 1960s. He saw, across the street, he saw a dark triangular object illuminated by moonlight and streetlight gliding in the air just behind and as high as the streetlight, which would be about 30 to 40 feet high. The witness stated it was shaped like a giant moth. It was about 3 feet in diameter, so that's not like huge. That's not like as big as like Mothman, that's only about like that big. It's about 3 feet in diameter and was flying a consistent 20 miles per hour, which is pretty weird. He says he saw it silently gliding in a straight path, heading southwest for about 1,000 yards before losing sight of it, and did not flap any wings. Now, that's consistent with the Mothman sightings. Mothman, the people who encountered the Mothman, all claimed that it didn't actually flap its wings. It had them, but it just sort of, when it would take off, it would just sort of shoot straight up in the air and not make any sound, which is really strange. One person said, though, it had almost like a mechanical sound, like a squeaky fan belt on a motor. There was a person that said that, but the guy who saw this this giant moth, 3-foot moth, he did a drawing of it, and it actually looks pretty similar to the Mothman sightings. I'll copy and paste this link here too for you guys to take a look at, and that's that. But yeah, it's pretty weird. There was a few Mothman sightings in Chicago a couple of years ago too. And this is a strange, I'm pretty fascinated. I usually don't get into a lot of cryptozoology, but when like being from West Virginia, I heard about the Mothman a lot when I was young, and I always found it to be really interesting and fascinating. And I read the book, Mothman Prophecies, which is excellent. And I read a lot of books by John Keel, and I highly recommend him. He's one of my favorite, probably my very favorite paranormal investigator. He was just a really good writer, and wrote about things that were quite interesting. I've talked about him on this podcast quite a bit. His work talking about the super spectrum and all of that is also very interesting. So it looks like I'm sorry, I forget Jay Snowden Davies' first name. Let me look here what he said. If I sent a song that needed a beat, are you able to record one? How much for a drum track? Well, yeah, I would do that, but right now I don't have a rehearsal space. If you'd want to have electronic drums on it, I could do that, but I can't do acoustic drums, unfortunately, at the moment. As far as how much that would cost, I don't know. You could just send me an email and we'll talk about it. You could just email me at demonicsweaters@gmail.com. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, electronic drums are cool, but they definitely sound electronic. It just depends on what you're going for. The stuff that I used them on, on my album Sandra's Bullock, or the EP that I released, that was, pretty obviously electronic, but I kind of wanted it that way. So it just depends on what you're looking for. I wish I still had a studio, where I could set up my acoustic drums, but right now I just don't. They're in my closet. But I might be doing some acoustic drumming at a gig next month with Ronan Conroy, who was in my last video doing the mixer test. Possibly we'll be playing with him at Arlene's Grocery next month, but I'm not totally sure yet. But oh, Jim, that's right. Sorry about that, Jim. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, like I said, if you want electronic drums, I could do it, but acoustic drums are going to be a problem, at least for the time being, until I can get another space. But I don't know when that will be. Yeah, but I mean, it's cool. Like, as far as, I'm not sad about not having a rehearsal space too much, because I do get to play still and practice, so that's pretty nice for me. And it's nice to also just have a drum set sitting right over there that I don't have to like go somewhere, and like I can just like play whenever I want. Well, not whenever I want, but most of the time when I want. If it's like late, I still will bother people and stuff, just because of the slamming of the pads and things like that. So, but yeah, definitely was a great purchase to have that electronic drum set. It's a lot of fun. Let's see, what else do I have here on the list to talk about? I have too many windows open. Oh, I just opened up my podcast player. That's not what I want. I already did the album that I like. Actually, it says here I should do another song, but I don't have to listen to that. I'm gonna play one. Last, I think. Oh, I know what I can talk about, which is movies and stuff like. Actually, no. I do kind of have to go to the bathroom, so I am gonna play a song, and I'll be right back after doing the bathroom, or the song and the bathroom. So here we go. I'm gonna put that on now. This song is something off of an old album. and it's a song called Warm Embrace, and this has guest vocals, and this is a very experimental track. I'll explain it more when I get back, but it has guest vocals by Lily De La Mora. Well, that was a total fail. Okay, I'll play that song later. Yeah, I forgot to unmute the music part, and I went to the bathroom and couldn't see that it wasn't playing. But thanks for letting me know, Jim. Yeah, so hopefully you guys stuck around through that bit of silence there. I'll edit that out when I do the podcast for distribution. But, so, yeah, it's... what was I talking about before that? Oh, yeah, the drum room. So, yeah, I don't know. My drum room was nice, but it was so tiny. Like, the studio I had before that, actually, I used to share with Ronan, was a lot nicer, but it was far. It was like a really far subway ride for me. It was way out in Bushwick, and I live in Park Slope. So it took me like more than an hour to get there, because the only way, even though they're both in Brooklyn, the only way to get to Bushwick, or the easiest way to get to Bushwick from Park Slope, is to take the subway into Manhattan and then back over through the L, or on the L, to go over to Bushwick, which is like a huge pain in the butt. And then, but I would have kept it if it weren't for the fact that a lot of the people that I was sharing, not Ronan, but there was some other bands in there, they just kept using my stuff. And that was really, really annoying. I asked them like several times not to use it. And every time I come in there, microphones would be taken out, and like cymbals would be out of the bags and stuff. And like, I mean, this went on for like, it wasn't like, you know, one of these things that happened like once and I freaked out. I mean, this went on for like a year, and I asked them repeatedly. I tried so many different things. I tried, you know, talking directly to people, leaving signs up and stuff, and it just kept happening. And then a couple of mics went missing, and then I was just like, well, that's that. I can't stay here anymore. So I moved out. And then I got my own space down the street, but for that tiny, tiny little room, you know, it was still, you know, it wasn't like cheap. You know, it wasn't that expensive, but it wasn't cheap either. And so all I could fit in there was just a drum set, and so it was really hard to do anything else in there except for play drums, which was cool. But if I can play drums on the electronic kit at home and not have to pay a monthly rent, then that's definitely better, especially since I'm kind of a freelancer and don't make a lot of money, so definitely works out better for me. So what do you guys think about that Joker movie trailer? I definitely want to check this out. I really think Joaquin Phoenix is a really great actor. I think he's super underrated, especially after I saw the film The Master. Like, I really, really loved that movie. I mean, it was a little different than I imagined it being. I thought it was going to be a lot more of a direct, you know, Scientology. Because, I don't know, if you're not familiar with The Master, it's Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix. And Philip Seymour Hoffman plays a character that is based loosely on L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. Excuse me. But I thought that it was going to be a little less loose than it was. It was still really good. I still really enjoyed the movie, but it was really like, I think after seeing it, it was more like somebody inspired by, not really even based on, because it was pretty darn different than, you know, the real Scientology story. But still very interesting stuff. And Joaquin Phoenix is great in it, and he looks really, really great as the Joker, I think. So we'll see how that goes. I try not to watch anything on YouTube about it, because, I mean, this movie, I really hate when YouTubers like start releasing reviews like 2 months before a movie comes out. Like, I don't even watch them, because it's like, stop ruining it, you know? Like, they basically don't care if people saw it or not, and they just want to get that ad revenue, so they'll just ruin it for everybody else. It's really annoying. Like, I really wish people wouldn't do that. I find it to be disrespectful of, you know, people who like to go to movies and be entertained. But so yeah, started watching a couple of good shows. One of them is Barry on HBO with what's his name, Hader. What's his guy's first name? Anyway, Bill Hader, who's in the second It, which I haven't seen yet either. But this show is great, actually. I started watching it last night and got like 4 episodes in. Me and Victor started watching it together, and we both really liked it. Maybe I liked it more than he did, but it's really good. I just think the story's really good, and it's well written, and it's funny, but it's still, it's still suspenseful. It's kind of like, if you're not familiar with the premise, Bill Hader plays a hitman who's kind of innocent. I mean, as far as innocent as a hitman could possibly be, because basically he's a war veteran and kind of gets taken advantage of by his one of his dad's old buddies. After he gets back from the war, he basically hires him to be a hitman, and he's getting all the jobs, and he just tells Bill Hader's character that he's taking out the bad guys, so he doesn't really know what he's doing a lot of the time. But then he goes to Hollywood, and there's a hit there, but then while he's out there, he realizes he has the acting bug, and so he starts like getting into acting classes and doing things. I don't want to spoil too much, but it's very entertaining, and it's really good so far. So I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of that. The other one, I'm going to have to look the name of it because my memory is horrible, but the other one is on Amazon, and it is with Bob Odenkirk, and I'm trying to stall as long as I can while I can find this name. It's called like Unbelievable or something. It's Bob Odenkirk and some young actress that I'm not sure of her name, but it has kind of this look. I don't know if you remember that film, A Scanner Darkly, where it was like a film that was animated on, it's called Undone. Okay, this is on Prime Video, and it's really cool. It's really, really cool. It has that, like I said, it's like filmed, but it's like animation over top of the real film, so it's kind of like an animated look, but it's been filmed or videoed. And the plot isn't super original, but it's a unique twist on it. It's basically the Dead Zone, if you're familiar with Stephen King's The Dead Zone, and not only just the book and the movie, but then the show that had Anthony Michael Hall through the early 2000s, which was a great show, actually. I think the show, everybody raves about the movie, but I really, really like the Dead Zone show. I think it's actually better than the movie, and I'm getting off topic, but this show, Undone, is very similar plot-wise to the Dead Zone. It's about a girl who's in an automobile accident. She gets in a coma, and then when she comes out, she has abilities, but the abilities are slightly different, but they're similar. But the twist of it is Bob Odenkirk is her dead dad, and she's basically being advised by her dead father's ghost the entire time. And describing it like that, it sounds kind of bad, but if you watch it, it's really good. And it's like the nuances of the story are really good. It's well acted, characters are deep, and it's funny. It's got a lot of funny parts in it as well. So definitely check that one out. I'm not finished with either of those yet, but I've enjoyed both of them quite a bit so far. As far as movies, I've been watching a lot of classic horror films because, basically, a couple of reasons. One, I got Pluto TV. I downloaded Pluto TV, and it's like got all these live TV channels on it. One of them's Pluto Horror, and they've been showing stuff on there like Dolls and Ghoulies and all these like 80s horror films that I used to watch when I was younger, and like that's been fun watching those again. Some of those are just absolutely horrible, like seeing them now, but some of them are way better than I remembered. Like not Ghoulies, what's the other one? Troll. I just watched it again and I loved it. Like I think it is such a unique movie. Like I don't know, if you haven't seen Troll, definitely watch it. I mean, it's stupid, but it's the best kind of stupid you could ever imagine, especially for one of these 80s horror films. So really good. And it's not scary or even that. It's a little violent, but it's not like horribly violent. It's just mostly funny. So yeah, Troll. Have I watched any new movies? I don't think so. Or if I did, I'm not remembering them. I did watch, though, The Curse of Frankenstein, which is a Hammer horror film that came out in 1957. If you're not familiar with Hammer horror, Hammer is a British, they're a British film company. I don't know if they're still around or not, but they did all types of movies. But then in the late 50s, they started remaking all the monster movies, like the classic monster movies, like Frankenstein and Dracula and the Mummy. And I think Frankenstein, The Curse of Frankenstein, was the first one like that they did, and ended up being a big hit. And so they started making a lot of horror films after the success of Curse of Frankenstein. But I'd never seen it before, so I watched a video that Cinemassacre did about it, and it made me really interested in it. So I checked it out. I watched it, and I really did enjoy it. It's kind of slow, and by today's standards, it's not going to be anything shocking, but it's a cool movie. It definitely has an atmosphere to it, and I liked, one of the weird things is they had to change Frankenstein's monster quite a bit because they were afraid of being sued by Universal, and so they basically redesigned the monster completely. It looks nothing like the Universal Frankenstein, but to me, in a way, it almost looks cooler, scarier, and definitely sad, more sad, because it looks more like what Frankenstein is supposed to be, which is a bunch of cut up dead bodies stitched together, and that's more what the Hammer horror Frankenstein looked like in Curse of Frankenstein. So that was, and it also has Christopher Lee plays the monster, and what's his name? Shoot, I forget the guy's name. The guy who played in Star Wars and all that stuff. Somebody put it in the chat there. But the guy who you'll know who I'm talking about, but who plays Dr. Frankenstein, and he was really good too. The whole cast was good. Costumes are amazing, and cinematography is really good, and the color looks great too. So that was really cool. I think that one was probably my favorite movie that I've seen in a while. And then all the shows that I was talking, or those two shows that I was talking about, I really, really am enjoying both of those. So yeah, other than that, just at night, I usually put on some kind of cheesy UFO documentary on Amazon or something like that. And most of those are just absolute garbage, but I watch them anyways. I don't know, just out of boredom, and when there's nothing else to watch, I'll put them on. But every now and then there'll be a gem. There are some good ones in there, but you'll never know, and they always have such generic titles. It's hard to distinguish between them. I always forget which one is good and which one. Peter Cushing, thank you, Jim. Yes, Peter Cushing. It's always hard to distinct, or to remember which ones are the good ones and which ones the bad ones, because I watched so many of them. Let me just look at my history here. Might be able to tell you. There was one that I watched not too long ago that I liked, but yeah, I don't know. It's hard. I don't even know if you can see your history on Amazon Video. Oh, I know another movie though that I might have talked about this on the podcast before, that I just rewatched, and it's another 80s horror film. It's one of my favorite though ever, and it's called The Gate. The Gate is basically if The Goonies were a horror film, well, with less kids, but there's some kids in it, and that's definitely just such a good movie. Basically, the basic story of it is there's these kids, and there's a tree in the backyard that gets struck by lightning, and then there ends up being a big hole under the tree, and somehow these kids, they're playing around with this satanic band has this album, and they play it backwards, and they say some of the stuff out of the album. They accidentally open up a gate to hell in their backyard, and so it's really a really great movie. And there's all kinds of claymation and stuff in it, and just really creepy stuff in this film. And I think at the time it was rated PG-13. And amazingly, it was kind of geared towards kids, because I saw it when I was young, but it's way scarier than something like, Goosebumps or something like that. This is, by today's standards, I don't think they would show a movie like this to kids now. It's just, things were different in the 80s. Horror films were just way more violent than they are now. Now it's video games are super violent. But when I was young, movies were super violent. Now movies really aren't that violent. Things unless you go out of your way to look for violent ones, or Quentin Tarantino movies or something like that. But as a whole, they're less violent. Like, mainstream popular movies in the 1980s were insanely violent. Like, RoboCop is just an absolutely sickeningly violent movie. Like, it's crazy. Like, and I saw it when I was so young. Like, and so many movies were like that. They just had like over the top violence in the 1980s. But I mean, this movie, The Gate, it's not like really, really violent, but it has some stuff in it that's definitely a little bit intense for kids, for sure. So, hey, what's up there? I'm gonna do my best on the pronunciation here. Is that, well, it looks like Adam, but it has an E, so I'm just gonna say Adam because I don't know how else to say it. But how you doing, Adam? If I'm pronouncing that wrong, I apologize. Well, I'm about running out of stuff here. I thought there'd be more questions today, but guess not. So unless somebody has some questions they want to ask, I'm going to start wrapping up. It's already been an hour. What do I have coming up? I could talk about that. Really just I'm going to do something on the fretless bass. That I'll be doing that pretty soon. And working on some music a little bit at a time. But yeah, that's about all. Hopefully be doing more of these podcasts. I had a couple of great guests lined up, but they all fell through, of course. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but maybe they'll come back. That'd be good. I had one of the guys who was one of the original programmers of the Kawai K1 synthesizer, and I really want to have him come on. So if some chance he hears this, yeah, please reply to my email. He was the one who originally reached out. We didn't say reach out about the podcast, but he reached out about other stuff, and I asked him about the podcast, and he said, yeah, he'd totally be into it. And then I sent him an email, and I never heard back, so I don't know what's going on with that. And then another one was Mr. Damon Che, the drummer from Don Cab, who I did the documentary on. I was in touch with his family about him being on the podcast, and they said that he was interested, and again, told me to send an email, which I did, and I never got a response from that either. And then I had another guest who was the current drummer for Black Flag at the moment. And then we even had a time set up, but he kind of flaked out on that. So I don't know what's going on lately, but I haven't, like I said, I haven't been focusing all of my energy here on the podcast. And like, I probably could have followed up better and stuff like that just because I didn't have the time. So I'll get back on that, trying to do that. And I would love to get my friend Chad back on here too, to do another proper UFO or paranormal type episode. Something like that would be a lot of fun. So anyway, that's going to be all for today, guys. I'm going to close it out with that song that I tried to play earlier, which is called Warm Embrace by me and Lily De La Mora. And I'll give the description of what this actually is now because I wasn't able to do it before. But this song is interesting, I think, because I did this actually in Pure Data. I think. Is that how I did it? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Pure Data is like a graphical programming language for music or even video if you want it to be. And I did this with basically doing like granular synthesis in Pure Data and taking Lily's voice and processing it through these granular synthesis algorithms and also playing some other keyboards on top of it. And I just think it's really interesting. It's not at all what we originally set out to do, but I'm really happy with the result of it. And this is on an old album. This is on, like, if you're not familiar, I release things under several different names. This one's under the artist name is Justin Robert. And I have an album called Yamanya, and that's what this is on. And so if you want to check that out, it's also at Anthill Recordings, where everything else I do is. So yeah, I'll just get to it. Here's the song. It's called Warm Embrace. And thanks everybody for watching again and listening, and I'll see you guys really soon.
Praise,